This week, I speak with Ronda Rousey ahead of her comeback match against Gina Carano on Netflix on May 16th. Rousey returns to the octagon for the first time in more than 9 years.
I'm a two-time Olympian, okay? I don't have any problem with Turkmenistan, but if I bow in against a chick from Turkmenistan, I'm gonna break her arm.
Then, I speak with Golden State Valkyries president Jess Smith on the start of the WNBA season and becoming the first team in women's professional sports to be worth $1 billion. It's all coming up this week on CNBC Sport, the podcast. Ronda, thanks for joining us. For those that don't know, Ronda is making a big comeback, a big fighting comeback after about 10 years on the sideline. It will be featured on Netflix next month against Gina Carano. I want to talk about the business of fighting, though, before we get into your comeback story, because I know I've seen comments that you have made fairly recently about how fighters are underpaid in the UFC and MMA in general. And I realized that, I don't think a lot of people even know how this works in terms of how fighters are paid. So I looked at the UFC website. There's 305 female athletes that are on that site. Let's not talk about fighters that were at your level at the very top, but let's go down the food chain a little bit. How are these women getting paid, and how much are they making?
I think something like the minimum that they have right now is $10,000. And
$10,000 per fight?
per fight.
Okay.
And then they have to pay all of their coaches a percentage out of that, and then pay taxes on it.
And how many fights are these women typically having in a year?
Usually, I think it's on their contract that they have to be offered at least 3 fights a year.
3 fights a year.
So that's $30,000 before they pay out their coaches and pay taxes.
Okay, so that's why you have made the comments about, that's poverty level.
That's poverty level.
Yeah.
Fighting full time on the biggest promotion that there is for MMA.
And so how would you advise fixing this? In other words, is the solution pay them more money per fight, or is the solution to pay them differently?
Well, I'm trying to be part of the solution right now, and I think the solution is competition. The UFC doesn't have any competition, and the fighters are basically given a contract, and it's take it or leave it. And I want there to be another promotion, and I think, partnering with MVP, hopefully we can make this a long-term thing after this event and have fighters a place to go where when their contract runs out, and to get a competing offer. Because right now there's no competing offer, and so they have zero leverage.
And so the idea would be develop a new promotion fighting league, essentially, and pay those fighters more money from the get-go?
Yeah, and it's possible now when it really wasn't before because of the streaming model, because the streamers are coming in and they're able to pay that kind of money to have this kind of content. Because before it was like you needed some billionaires like the Fertittas to take a big gamble on it, and now you have these streamers paying up front for these fights, and the UFC is just siphoning off most of it for themselves. It's not like there isn't money to go around. They're just, legally bound to the shareholders now that they're a publicly traded company to maximize shareholder value.
What gives you confidence that there's enough demand for another promotional vehicle? I mean, it's fine if we're talking about somebody at your level and at your fame, but do you have sort of the data that there's definitely an audience for this?
I think there's definitely an audience for premier fights. I think it's extremely oversaturated right now. There's too many fights. There's too many for people for fans to keep up with. And I think hopefully this experiment is a success, and MVP and Netflix want to invest in MMA in the long term. And I think, my opinion, the way to go is doing fewer fights a year, really stack the cards with great talent, and make those fights something that you can't miss, something that you're going to hear people mention at the water cooler. And now it's just too much to keep.
So really it wouldn't be another league. It would just be sort of the promotional vehicle for a handful of these kind of marquee events. Have you talked to Netflix about this? Would you want Netflix to be the home for this?
I think Netflix is the only home that can really really be able to challenge the UFC because they are the biggest streamer, the biggest platform in the world, and their fights will get the most views. And I think that they're the absolute perfect partner for this, and that's why I pursued them from as soon as I could.
So let's talk about sort of the comeback. I know the origin of this is that you called Gina, correct, and said, "Hey, is this something you'd be interested in doing?" Did you have a friendship with her from before?
Well, I called her through Dana.
You went to Dana and said, "Would Gina be interested in this?"
I first went to Dana. I said, "Would you be interested in this?"
Okay, just me, meaning I want to come back.
No,
Or no, specifically
I
with Gina.
asked
Okay,
Dana if he would be interested in me versus Gina.
okay, got it.
And he said he'd definitely be interested.
So you asked Dana before you even spoke to Gina about
Well,
this.
he's the one who had her number.
Right. Okay. Okay.
And I wanted to talk to him about it first because I owe so much to him. And so he's the one that reached out to her. And then he originally was like, we should make this for the 145-pound title because it's vacant. And then, that's when negotiations started, but it didn't work out.
And then you sort of make your way over to MVP at that point?
Yeah, I mean, the longer story is they were about to switch from the pay-per-view model to the streaming model.
Right.
And
This is the UFC,
UFC.
with the Paramount's switch in terms of how they got rid of all the pay-per-view fighting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Dana offered me like the best pay-per-view structure that it had ever offered anybody. It was an incredible deal, and I was happy to take it. But then Gina needed some more time to get into top shape.
So pause there. So for the pay-per-view model for a fighter, how is that pay structure work? Are you paid based on the amount of subscribers? Is that how that works?
So you're paid per view. And so you get a certain share per every view.
And
he was offering me the most that they've offered anybody per a view.
Okay.
And so if I hit my historical numbers, I would have made more in that one fight than my entire career combined.
And how is MVP/Netflix paying you?
Well, I'm not allowed to say specifically exactly what it is.
Fine, roughly. Generically.
Generically. Well, it's California, so they have to publicize it after the fight.
Okay.
And so I'm really not allowed to say it now, but I'm definitely blowing any kind of records of whatever record there was before for whatever a woman has been paid to fight in any kind of combat sport is being beaten by how would I say, like a
order of magnitude.
An order of magnitude more. It is
right.
being beaten.
Okay, gotcha. And of course, Netflix has demonstrated that it can draw in a lot of eyeballs. They did it with the Tyson Paul fight last year, which I think blew any estimates out of the water. I mean, are there whisper numbers around how many? Like, do you have a number in your mind in terms of how many people you think might be watching this?
I have no idea. I think that fight was a huge part of my inspiration to come back and how much people missed what Mike Tyson has, even at almost 60. And I thought that if he can be the biggest fight in years, then I can do the same in MMA, especially with somebody like Gina. But that being said, like his fight was 108 million views live. Think Amanda Serrano, they'd had like an all women's boxing card. I think it did something like
Taylor Serrano.
Yeah, it did something like, I don't know, like 5 million or 4 million or something like that. So anywhere between there is what's expected. But what I would like to beat is any of the UFC's numbers on Paramount. I just want it to be the most viewed MMA fight of all time. And that would be a success for me.
And now, of course, Paramount has upcoming UFC event on the White House too, so I'm sure they're going to put that up against your fight when that happens. Is this like? It sounds to me like this is a bit of a rivalry. I'm curious what your relationship is like now with Dana and with UFC.
Well, my relationship with Dana is always great because I love him and he's incredible, and I owe so much to him. But my allegiance is to him and the Fertitas, not the company that he sold.
The Tyson Paul fight drew some criticism that it wasn't a real fight, that it was an event, it was a stunt. Tyson's old and he, after a couple minutes, clearly didn't have anything left in the tank. Is this fight with you and Gina going to be a real fight?
Definitely this is a real fight. But also, like, I think what Tyson and Paul proved with that fight is that people aren't tuning in to watch a belt. They aren't tuning in to watch a brand. They're tuning in to watch two fighters that they know and identify with to see the conclusion of the story that they are telling. And I think that's something that the UFC has forgot, or maybe on purpose has tried to change. I think when they stopped giving the fight cards names and started giving them numbers, when they stopped letting the fighters, when they started putting them in uniforms and trying to make them all look the same. I think that uniqueness is something that made MMA so special, and they try to make it more like football or more like basketball. And part of what made everybody love it from the beginning is that it wasn't that. There is something like primal and feral about it, and now it just seems like it's been tamed beyond recognition.
It strikes me, this is like more of a psychology question, I think, than anything, but you clearly have a lot of respect for Gina. When you go into that fight, do you need to tap into something where you can sort of generate like a hatred for the other person, or do you divorce the fighting from the emotion where you're saying, you know what, I'm just doing something that's tactical here. I'm not really hurting this otother person.
I'm a two-time Olympian, okay? I don't have any problem with Turkmenistan, but if I bow in against a chick from Turkmenistan, I'm going to break her arm. That's just, sorry if I'm not allowed to swear.
That's all right.
But, that's just part of being a combat sport athlete at the highest level. I don't need that anger to be at my absolute best. There's a switch that I can flip, and I'm just there. And that's like,
have you always had that?
Yeah, I've always had that, even since I was like a little kid. Because a lot of times at tournaments, I would fight the same girls every single week. So we would be sitting at like the front of the mat, and we'd be like playing like patty cake or slide or whatever. Then we would like get up and bow into the mat, and then beat the hell out of each other, and then come back in, and then like start playing again. And it was just some of my favorite fights actually with people that I'm really good friends with now.
There's another, I think, sort of oddity, maybe, I'm not really sure exactly what the right word is, where both you and Gina, so for those that don't know, after you had your MMA career, you then had a fairly long WWE career. You've also done acting roles. Gina has had a fairly long and distinguished acting career post fighting. It strikes me that superficially, acting and fighting are like on different ends of the spectrum. Like there's not a direct connection between those two things. And yet clearly there is, at least for the two of you. Can you help me connect the dots to why both of you have gone in that direction?
Well, martial arts film is an entire genre. There is a connection between them. And I think
did you grow up watching martial art film?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But I think a big thing about MMA that people don't realize is that it's not the Olympics. It's entertainment. It's professional fighting. You have to be an entertainer. You have to know how to be on camera. You need to know how to
And
tell
so that
story.
goes into the training for this. Like you're getting coached on how to be an entertainer in addition to fighting.
Well, I don't know if anyone's coaching me on it.
Yeah. Well, you clearly have it naturally. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think promotion in itself is a form of storytelling. Describe
the difference in the culture between WWE and UFC.
Oh God. I mean, they're so different. It's I would say that like WWE is like stunts on Broadway, like a traveling circus that is a soap opera about a wrestling organization where everybody does their own stunts. And MMA is it's just completely different. You'll never have the same card twice. So you always have a whole bunch of different people there, and it's much more adversarial, I think, in WWE and just pro wrestling in general. Everyone's working together to try and make it the best show possible, and in MMA, you're working against each other to try and make the best show possible.
Right, yeah. You've obviously trained for this now for quite a while. Is this it? Is this a one-time comeback, or is this a launch of a part 2 of your career?
I think it really depends on this fight. You know, if it's the kind of fight people want to see a trilogy out of, that I can't really, say. But I promised my husband and my sister that this would be the very last one, and we really want to have some more kids. And
you already have 4 more.
I know, but I just can't take any more detours. Like I want a bigger family, and it's time to get started.